Okay, hello David. We are about to
Yeah,
begin our
shall I
live
turn the
stream.
light off?
Yeah, sure. That would be fine. We are live, just getting prepared to begin with David Hawkins, of course. And David has spoken so much about 9/11, done so much research into reverse engineering 9/11.
Very
Today
dark now.
is
Mine's,
a important day for us to continue with this research. And, I'm always vamping these days, David. It seems no matter how much preparation we go into, there's always something creeping in at the outset of the program. So
You're much younger than I am, so.
it doesn't stop the technical problems from creeping in,
Oh,
David, but we're just about there. And of course, this is our free preview right now for the upcoming only on Patreon program called Reverse Engineered Crime Scene Investigations. And I just want to get you the screen share, David, so you can see everything that we'll be talking about today.
that's
And
magnificent.
David, it's the, of course, 17th anniversary of the horrendous 9/11 attacks. You've done so much work in helping everyone understand the parameters, the technologies, identifying the technological signature, and helping us understand the process of reverse engineering a crime scene investigation. Why don't you give us a little bit of information about what we're going to be talking about later on Patreon when people join us on there for the exclusive content?
Yes, thank you, Jason. So the schematic that you've so ably put up with Osama bin Laden's image in the foreground, rather like the image he had on the Amalgam Virgo war game exercise of June the 1st to the 2nd of 2001. That was by way of being a full dress rehearsal. And in the background behind him, there is a picture of the Federal Bridge Certification Authority as it appeared in a 2013 implementation. And it's changing every year, or it seems to be changing every year. But I had initially started with my storyboard, which you may have a copy, with the 2001 implementation of the Federal Bridge that I'm now calling the Imperial, or bin Laden's Imperial AI Bridge, because there was a very heavy use made by British intelligence of artificial intelligence, of which I would claim to be a pioneer, having worked in it since 1981. And then on the top left of that schematic, you show a rather stylized representation of the Union Jack and an indication that British intelligence had been a collaborator with radical Islam for decades. And in fact, British intelligence appears to have set up an office for the bin Laden Al Qaeda group in 1994,
Let's talk about
which
that for
is
a moment, David, because I
okay.
had no idea. And actually, the image of this Union Jack, the stylized Union Jack, comes from a book about exactly that. Why don't you give everyone some background on that office, the odd name, and the fact that it is virtually invisible on the internet as of now?
Yeah, there's been some scrubbing there, quite obviously. But what's intriguing is two things happened in 19, well, many things happened in 1994, some associated with Field McConnell's sister, Christine Marcy, and some associated with the conspiracy of British intelligence to create a persona for this radical group led by bin Laden. So the office was created in London to allow bin Laden to propagate his propaganda, if you will, into the world about the great Satan of the United States. But in parallel with that was something very interesting going on in the United States. That is to say, Christine Marcy, Field McConnell's sister, outsourced the operation of the United States National Visa Center to Serco, which to all intents and purposes is a proxy for the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense. So in one fell blow, the intelligence agencies on both sides of the pond, so to speak, created an opportunity to bring bin Laden's sleeper cells into the United States and embed them in various departments inside the Department of Defense, the mentor-protege programs and so on. And synchronized with that was the setting up of the office for bin Laden, basically to mount the campaign and complete what they'd failed to do in 1993, which is blow up the World Trade Centers by knocking one tower into the other. And the guy who did that, his name is Ramzi Youssef, and he was arrested. And Field McConnell's sister, Christine Marcy, parked him in ADX Florence, the Supermax jail. And on one side, I'm not quite sure how these characters were organized by Christine Marcy, but on one side there was a Ted Kaczynski, and then on the other there was Timothy McVeigh. So she created a university of bombers, right, in ADX Florence, with the ability to fly them through Con Air, the United States Justice, Prisoner, and Alien Transportation System, into a crime scene before the crime occurs. And then if she didn't kill them, she'd bring them back in jail with a nearly perfect alibi. So across the pond, you have, I don't know about shake hands with the devil, but it's something that is so alien to what Americans and British believe really happened on 9/11. I think you and I are doing a great service in exposing it. Over to you.
Well, the thing I wanted to get into, and thank you, David, for giving us that overview. I think it's important because although some people may find it repetitive, I have learned that some of the things that you're sharing with us are so complicated that it actually requires some repetition in order for you. It's almost Shakespearean in the way that you repeat these themes, because it's like the first time you hear it, it's foreign language. The second time you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, that again. And the third time you start to let it sink in, but there's so many different things going on. And the new concept that we're introducing today, at least it's new to me, is this Advice and Reform Committee, which in the very typical fashion sounds very innocuous, almost benevolent. But this, of course, was the office of Osama bin Laden in London, and essentially this is what became Al-Qaeda, correct?
Yeah, totally. So MI5, MI6 and its proxies, Serco, that is to say, that was the change in name from RCAGB 1929. Serco, which you could describe as a patent monopoly company, was obviously heavily involved in setting up the communications on the Imperial AI bridge for bin Laden, or the bin Laden agents, to execute the 9/11 attack and bring both towers down in a way that Ramzi Youssef had failed to do in 1993. Over to you.
Now, so this Imperial AI bridge, what is that exactly?
Well, it's my name, and this is the fascinating, when you do reverse engineering of technology, it's always fascinating to see where things came from. So today, we have a Federal Bridge Certification Authority using technology called public key infrastructure that was invented at GCHQ in the early 1970s. And that allows you to send, theoretically, secure information over non-secure networks. Of course, the key that is absolutely vital in that so-called web of trust is who has the root key. And unfortunately for America on 9/11, and many of these subsequent so-called random acts by terrorist groups around the world, the root key is held by the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense, which can then pretend to be anything. Go ahead.
Sorry. So when you're speaking about the Federal Bridge, this diagram that we're showing right now is sort of an infographic that illustrates its structure. But what is it? Is it a computer network?
Yeah, it's a computer network, an internet-based network that, as I say, uses or allows the transfer theoretically between trusted partners on the bridge over secure communications over non-secure networks. So this will use standard internet, right? But through the use of a pair of enormously large prime numbers that have to be paired, you can actually take, for example, I see on what you're showing now, the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense is the big orange or yellow blob down on about 4 o'clock. and above it is the Netherlands MOD. This was dated around the 2000, and I believe this shows that the United Kingdom Ministry of Defence and the Netherlands Ministry of Defence had been tricked or sucked into operating on the Federal Bridge prior to the skyjacking of MH Flight 370, and ultimately the departure probably of the same hull but rebadged as MH17 from Amsterdam Airport in 2014 to fly towards Ukraine and then into contested airspace to be blown up by what appears to be a missile with a proximity fuse, which is one of the first patents on my storyboard that actually dates back, the proximity fuse dates back to the Tizard mission of September of 1940, when it looks like Victor Rothschild sent a whole bunch of patents to the United States in exchange for production rights and access to the vast production capability of the United States of America. Over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification, David, because, I mean, again, I've been looking at this for days and weeks, and I have always had a little bit of uncertainty as to exactly what it represents. But of course, so you're talking about an encrypted, almost private club that shares information.
It's called public key infrastructure, where if you have the right keys, you can communicate over public key infrastructure privately. So, for example, there was a conspiracy, as I believe happened on 9/11, between the state of Illinois, the most corrupt state in the Union, the Department of Justice, which would include people like Christine Marcy, who founded JPATS. Actually, technically, she bought a Boeing 727 in 1985 using money I think she stole from the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund for the Federal Marshal's prisoner transportation system. So immediately by 1985, she had the capability of flying the most dangerous men and women in the world to any particular scene, such as, I don't know, the Kobar Towers, the 1998 East African embassy bombings, the 2000 USS Cole bombing in Aden Harbor, and of course 9/11, in combination with other people who might be invited along for the ride. Then you have Veterans Affairs. Well, there's lots of key veterans that are extraordinarily vulnerable after they've had their careers, maybe active in the front line, and they've been shot at, lost an arm, a leg, they've been traumatized, they're pissed off with the government that sent them into action ill-equipped or ill-led. And of course, they would fall into the hands of people who might decide to treat them with psychotropic drugs. And Christine Marcy is credited with developing the United States Marshal's prisoner medical services program, where I think she was giving, stuff like, I don't know, lysergic acid amide to prisoners as a kind of psychotropic switch that could elicit characteristic patterns of rage and hallucinations. Over to you.
And that lysergic acid, you've found a patent from Eli Lilly, right?
Yeah, dated 1956, you see, which was the heyday of MK Ultra. Now, I've mentioned Victor Rothschild in the context of he's a biologist and a chemist, or he died in 1990. He's a bomb disposal expert. He's the former chairman of the Royal Commission on Gambling. He's the former chairman of NM Rothschild and Sons Limited, which is Donald Trump's investment banker, incidentally. And NM Rothschild and Sons Limited is also the investment bank for Queen Elizabeth II, and this company Serco. So basically, I would say, don't want to be too mean to NM Rothschild, but maybe it's one way, you're basically borrowing from the devil. Over to you.
Well, it's a really bizarre array of credentials for someone to have: a bomb disposal expert and the head of the gambling authority. I mean, it's interesting when we start to hear these things. A lot of people might listen to our programs here on Crowdsource the Truth, or of course they can catch them if they become a sponsor of David on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. and they can see our exclusive live streams there. They can also sponsor Crowdsource the Truth by going to patreon.com/crowdsource the truth, and that's the way we do it. When David and I do an exclusive live stream, you can get it on his Patreon page or on the Crowdsource the Truth page. And David, a lot of people hear you talk about Victor Rothschild and death pool betting, and I mean, for me, when I first became aware of you and started hearing about these things, they sound so esoteric and fantastic and off the wall, it's almost difficult to believe. But then when you see these individuals who have these credentials, and you hear about the patents, and you go through your reverse engineering process, your crime scene evaluation and investigation, it starts to become very clear.
Yeah, and so what I think we're starting to create a new form of edutainment, which is crime scene investigation, interactive crime scene investigation, where the first half of a show such as you and I are having, we can take them back from a particular criminal signature or a signature at the crime scene, such as the hole in the inner courtyard wall of the Pentagon. It's about 12 foot in diameter. It's got about 1.5 tons of debris, as far as I can judge, inside. And we're supposed to believe that a civilian passenger jet knocked through 8 walls to create that damage. But then about 10 minutes after impact of whatever it was hit the Pentagon, you see a line of people with FBI T-shirts, as far as I can judge, picking up little bits of evidence from the Pentagon lawn. And there's a great saying in crime scene investigations, evidence of absence is not absence of, no, correction, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Obviously, if they take away the kind of bits and pieces on the Pentagon lawn that might indicate the use of a proximity fuse and a rocket booster hardened penetrator missile from Lockheed Martin, then you can't prove that it was a hardened penetrator bomb from Lockheed Martin together with a proximity fuse from British Aerospace. So again, and that's technically known as the crime of spoliation. So what I might do with your agreement, Jason, is to go back. Let's say we take that hypothetical, no, not even hypothetical, the hole in the inner courtyard of the Pentagon, and we go back along the timeline of these various patents, get into the 1980s when on the 11th of November 1988, I got a priority date for my European patent for a deductive computing machine, which was my, I believe, breakthrough in terms of artificial intelligence and expert systems. And then lo and behold, relatively recently, over the past few months, I guess, I find the following month, Field McConnell is in conversation with his sister, Christine Marcy. Field well, he now has, I believe, 23,000 hours of flying experience, military and civilian.
Wow.
And his sister, Christine Marcy, who at the time, I think she probably had a title something like Senior Counsel for the Detention and Deportation Program of the Immigration and Naturalization Service. She's founded essentially what would become nicknamed Con Air. She's got a Boeing 727. She can fly some seriously nasty people to a crime scene, organized into, let's say, 6 Con Air SWAT team groups to focus on script, spot, shoot, snuff, spin, spoil, right? And they can do their dirty deed and be dispersed or be back in jail that night for dinner, right? So it's the ultimate use of, I would argue, the Imperial brain, the Imperial bridge or the Federal bridge with an AI component, because the patent granted to Jerome Lemelson for prisoner tracking describes in the abstract the use of fuzzy logic, expert systems, and artificial intelligence algorithms to upgrade a prisoner's privileges if he does what he's told or she does what she's told, or downgrade them if she doesn't. Now, downgrading a prisoner's privileges might say, well, you haven't behaved yourself, so we're going to crash the plane. Now, even if you're a pretty hardened prisoner, right, it's going to be sobering to know that you're going to get on a plane courtesy of Christine Marcy's joint automated booking system, and fly to, I don't know, Terre Haute. I don't know if the pronunciation is right, if you're Timothy McVeigh, where she's going to have you executed before 2001 because you might blow the whistle on her contribution to the 9/11 attack. Over to you.
Timothy McVeigh was given the death penalty, wasn't he?
Yeah, and she had him executed in 2001 before the 9/11 attack because he was a veteran. Oh, incidentally, one of her gigs was assistant director or human resources, labor and veterans group in the Office of Personnel Management. Now, that would have given her access to a lot of, I would argue, traumatized veterans who might need psychotropic drug to calm their nerves, or might be administered psychotropic drugs in order to generate the characteristic patterns of rage and hallucinations you might want to elicit if you're going to attack the United States from the inside out. Over to you.
I mean, it makes so much sense. Again, it sounds so bizarre, but it makes a lot of sense. I mean, when we see those autopsy photos of John Benet Ramsey, it's hard to imagine how any person, even an evil person, could do those things. And when you speak about...
Unless they have been administered these kind of drugs.
Right. Rage. Yeah. It seems like something that someone must have to be out of their mind to do. So since today is September 11th, let's come back to bin Laden for a moment and let's talk a bit about this Advice and Reform Committee. What would you say the role was, or the sequence of events? I mean, so bin Laden opens this office in London, and you and I spent a significant amount of time prior to this interview searching around the internet to try to find the address of this office, this Advice and Reform Committee, and it was incredibly difficult, virtually impossible to do. This was interesting. I found a fax, what appears to be a fax, sent from this very office, even signed by Mr. bin Laden himself. And I found it very curious. That's a weird signature, isn't it? He's almost got a sigil within his signature. And it just says London office. This is essentially the letterhead or the masthead for a fax cover sheet. I would expect it to say whatever the address is, but it doesn't. It's a highly secretive office.
Well, you asked me what the function of that office was.
Yes.
I would say they were preparing the script, having failed to knock down the buildings in 1993, and have Ramzi Youssef saying, well, give me more money and I'll do it the next time. I think they put the Imperial Artificial Intelligence or Imperial AI bridge onto it. That is all those resources that you see, for example, on that schematic, right? Yes. And they developed a script for the 9/11 attack, which was embedded inside an exercise. It was rehearsed on June the 1st to the 2nd of 2001 in the exercise, the training exercise called Amalgam Virgo. And if you look at the fighter flow diagram, I think we looked at that last week, you can see or infer there's a whole variety of patented devices that were used in the exercise of June the 1st and 2nd of 2001. And I think what they were trying to do with Christine Marcy back then was to see if they could develop, let's say, 6 SWAT teams under her Con Air program, fly them into a crime scene. In the particular case of Amalgam Virgo, the target was the Capitol building. Right? So that's June the 1st and 2nd of 2001. They're aiming for the Capitol building. And what they're rehearsing is, can they switch the red team from foe to friend and the blue team from friend to foe? And let me give you the names of the patents that would allow you to do that. Boeing has an asymmetric encryption system that allows you to separate the header out from a public key infrastructure message from the content, the body of the content. So you could have a high volume data in the content, but you don't want to compress the header and have it disappear. So what Boeing has done with that invention is it's allowed itself to send a signal, let's say from the headquarters of the Boeing office in Chicago that was being commissioned on 2001, September, I think, September the 4th, bounce a message or messages through the AWACS systems to the various AWACS weapons directors, who can then literally switch from simulation mode to live fire. So I guess they stayed in simulation mode for Amalgam Virgo, and they switched to live fire for Global Guardian. And that's a patent taken out by Boeing. And I think you can, realistically, you can ignore the dates of these patents because many of them, the more sinister ones, are being filed for a priority date by insiders inside the patent office. And tragically for the United States of America, the pre-processing of patents is now done by the British company Serco, who we'll come back to. And so by not telling the world in general what this patent does, you can spring a surprise like they did on 911. Now, the blue team needs to be stood down on 911. And that's interesting because the man who may have had the authority to stand down the blue team was Norman Mineta, Secretary of Transportation, who on the Christmas Day night of 1996 was a vice president of Lockheed Martin, who presumably signed off on that bonus payment to John Bennett Ramsey of $118,000. And my argument would be, had he seen the images of the torture killing of John Bennett Ramsey, he may have very well been persuaded not to speak out about the conspiracy on 911 to overthrow the government. Over to you.
It certainly does instill in the mind the incredible vicious nature of the person that would do that. David, I don't know how relevant this is, but it is quite humorous. Two of the inventors of this Boeing asymmetric encryption for data links, one of them is David S. Parkman, and the other is David W. Carman. So you can park the car with these two individuals. I find it strange when these names are so strange. Mr. Shoebridge came up in some of Ole Damagard's research.
Look at the priority date. Look at the priority date.
Yes, May 4th, 2001.
So January, February, March, April, May. So it's done in May, and the exercise, Amalgam Virgo, starts on the 1st and 2nd of June of 2001. So I'll bet you, Jason, that they used this to determine whether or not they could make those switches and take over the encrypted communications between Boeing headquarters in Chicago, the AWACS systems, and the targeted Boeing aircraft. And so they could then do what Field McConnell told his sister to do. If you got a mutiny of prisoners on the plane, just switch it to drone mode, and presumably the argument is that civilizes or quietens or terminates ultimately the prisoner. But from the technology point of view, you could do that to a plane that is being flown by a perfectly good pilot, capable, honorable pilot, like Field McConnell's classmate, Captain Chick Burlingham, who was the pilot of Flight 77 that allegedly hit the Pentagon. It didn't hit the Pentagon. It went over the top of the Pentagon, out into a drop zone that Field tells me, I think from memory, was W386A. Probably it was obliterated with smack-sonic incendiaries. And what was hiding in the radar shadow of the Boeing passenger aircraft was probably an A3 Sky Warrior from Raytheon carrying a Lockheed Martin rocket-boosted hardened penetrator bomb that punched its hole through the walls of the Pentagon.
What is a smack-sonic incendiary, David?
That's the trade name for a trilaminar system of insulation that we believe can serve the dual purpose of operating as an incendiary. So there are two thin layers of aluminum. I'll give it the American pronunciation. The Brits say aluminium, but we know what we're talking about. And that's sandwiching a polyethylene layer that serves as a damper or an insulation to sound and thermal and vibration, unless the polyethylene has a significant amount of powdered aluminum, in which case, if you put a spark across the aluminum walls, and there are various patterns for that particular configuration, you actually convert the powdered aluminum into an incendiary with a reaction temperature of 5,800 degrees Fahrenheit, which is twice the temperature of the surface, or maybe it's half the temperature of the surface of the sun. And when you think that steel melts at, I think, 2,800
2,500.
degrees,
Yeah, something like that.
something like that, this is double the melting point of steel.
Wow.
And that explains, you see, if you put that in the insulator in the shafts of the elevators of the Twin Towers, and then you can ignite that possibly with a proximity fuse carried by a elevator, which you shear, so it's dropping under free fall gravity. Every time the proximity fuses passes an ignition system in the elevator shafts with this Maxsonic insulation, it ignites the reaction at 5,800 degrees, produces a huge amount of gas that would explain why you've got 10-ton girders flying out of the roof, and the internal core structure of the building turns to molten steel, and it free falls under gravity.
So, but
Which is what you see.
wouldn't that leave chemical residue of these compounds?
Of course, it does, and they've found the residue, but Robert Mueller, in his wisdom, he's so busy chasing the Russia conspiracy. This guy, well, first of all, he is the United States Marine Corps guy, and I think he took the job of director of the FBI around the 4th of September. And
Yes.
I don't know if you can see on the storyboard down at the bottom, subsequent to the 9/11 attack, there was a series of letters containing weaponized anthrax. Right? I think you're probably looking at an older version. We want the other one. Anyway, there's a second version of that, right, that shows sabotage spore powder on the bottom left. And that's a patent that was granted to Degussa. Now, my colleagues at Able Danger say I'm being unfair on Degussa because they had nothing to do with providing the Waffen SS with the insecticide that would knowingly it would be used on the Jews in the extermination camps. My point is that Degussa may be perfectly innocent, but if they have a patent that someone like Victor Rothschild sees might function as a dual use, so instead of killing cockroaches, you kill human beings in the extermination camp, Degussa may very well be, and for example, like Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and what's the other one? Lockheed Martin. The directors of Lockheed Martin may be looking at images, for example, of Christine Marcy's Con Air SWAT teams in action on a 6-year-old girl at their home on Christmas night in Boulder, Colorado, in which case those directors, they may be the most brave people in the world, but that spectacle is going to horrify them. And the great tragedy, and that's why you and I think, have an absolutely vital role in waking up the public at large. They don't know who is making or responsible for making those snuff films. And I think what we can say now is, well, it's not so much an individual, it's a virtual floating matrix on the Imperial AI bridge where people are pulled out of their day jobs. Maybe they've previously got on a plane with some really nasty convicts and gone up to a pig farm in British Columbia and witnessed women being shot with biological bullets, whilst the elite in the 4-star and 5-star hotels around the world placed bets on how long these women would take to die. And the patent there was developed by a guy called Howard Lutnick. Does that ring a bell?
Yes, he was the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald.
Correct. And he has I don't know if you call it a brownstone. He's got a huge mansion. He's a bundler for Hillary Clinton. And he lives in a mansion beside one Jeffrey what's his name? The pedophile pimp for the Clintons, Jeffrey
Epstein.
Epstein. Right. Now, this is very interesting because this is consistent with my theory that they are operating death pools where they're betting on the times or body counts for high value target deaths or mass casualty events. And the witnesses, including expert witnesses, which might include people like Field McConnell, are being blackmailed because they've done something in their past. I mean, men and women go through a certain stage when the hormones are raging, if you will, where they do pretty extreme things, right?
College.
If you feed them these, college, and that comes back to that Greek life community. If you're given psychotropic drugs and flown up to an initiation ceremony at the pig farm, you may be doing things to a prostitute, right? Where when you wake up and come out of those hallucinations, you say, was I there? Did I really do that? But someone's got a film of you doing it.
Wow.
And then what are you going to do? Because you don't know who has custody of the films. And what I'm claiming is, if you look at the top of my storyboards, there's a couple of women there who are intellectual property lawyers who know exactly how to squirrel away those kind of films and make sure that they're encrypted and doubly encrypted. And they're only brought out when you need to extort a favor from, or some silence, over on the right. Those two, Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama, are intellectual property lawyers, and Michelle Obama is Alpha Kappa Alpha. I think she scares the hell out of little Barry. And remember, Barry at 7 years old was in Jakarta with his mother, Ann Dunham, who assigned him a cross-dressing male prostitute called Turdy. Right?
Seems so the strange thing for a young mother to do.
Well, she was a communist, right? I mean, whatever that means. Her affiliations with Marshall Davis, Frank Marshall Davis, he was a communist.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, Chicago would one day receive, I would think, a highly groomed pedophile entrapment expert by the name of Barack Hussein Obama, who's the stepson of Lolo Swatero in Jakarta, who I think had been groomed by the cross-dressing male prostitute called Turdy. Over to you.
Wow. And so much to take in and to contemplate. It really is astounding. And it's an important, I can picture someone tuning in now for the first time, David, and being just absolutely blown away by the things that you're saying, because they do sound so outrageous. And it makes me really want to encourage people to join us on Patreon, where we will be in just 22 minutes. We're going to be wrapping up this preview live stream here on YouTube and Periscope and Facebook and elsewhere. And the second half of what we'll be doing today will be an exclusive live stream available only to sponsors of patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. That's David's page, and I definitely would encourage people to go there, check out the information that David has on there. You can be watching this live stream right now on there. And of course, our exclusive live streams, reverse engineered crime scene investigations, will appear on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, and also on patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. So David,
yes. Could I just ask you, Jason, to scroll
Please.
back up? Because I think when from here on, when I'm being interviewed by people like yourself or Field McConnell, Bishop Larry Gators, who I've got later on in the evening, I'm going to say to them, this is such an enormous scope, this conspiracy. I think, what was Edgar Hoover's comment? He said the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous, he cannot believe it exists. And that's why I spent a lot of time with my colleagues at Able Danger in putting together this storyboard, which I think is a fundamental document that every talk show host, including you and Field, Bishop Gators, if we are going to succeed in communicating in a meaningful way to an audience, because there's two halves to this. We're educating people into a set of facts that can be linked by inference, right? It is a fact that there is an encryption system an asymmetric encryption system invented by Boeing that would be tailor-made for the red team to attack the blue team, right? So the great advantage of going into the patent office, which I've been doing on a regular basis since I invented the deductive computing machine, and finding these devices that you see as you scroll down, you'll keep going on that, scrolling down. So you see that over to the right, that on the right-hand side, that's, you use that to revoke the passwords or certificates for the blue team, right? So
So
in the
let me
middle of an
pause you for a
exercise
second.
using,
Let me pause you for a second,
yeah,
David, because it's becoming more
yeah.
clear to me, even just in this broadcast. And if it's unclear to me, I presume there may be viewers who are also having it be slightly unclear. So the Imperial Bridge and the Federal Bridge are one and the same.
Yes, it's my slang.
Got it.
When they describe it as a Federal Bridge Certification Authority, I say if you look at the people who are connected over the Federal Bridge and believe they are transmitting to each other securely, right? That is to say, the rest of the open network doesn't actually hear or see what they're actually doing. In the middle of an exercise like Amalgam Virgo or Global Guardian, you have the red team using this encryption to conceal the conspiracy to attempt the overthrow of the government of the United States on 911. So the bridge, the Federal Bridge, I think is acting like the old imperial brain that was the instrument room of the General Post Office in the United Kingdom in the 1940s and 50s, when around the empire, the cable messages were coming in near real time, right? But the snail mail might take weeks. So the people who could control the instrument room of the General Post Office, and I believe the Privy Council could actually take the instrument room of the General Post Office, let's call it the Imperial Brain, for 8 days without request to Parliament. So you can conceive of a pretty amazing conspiracy to launch a war somewhere in the world, or a civil war, right? With
Yes.
access to the Imperial Brain. Well, now they've got the Imperial Bridge, right? That post office building has been pulled down, but now they've moved from the cable telegraph to the internet and public key infrastructure invented by those damn Brits, you know, they're very creative, and then sealed off from the general public and used to operate and enrich and empower an elite. Over to you.
Okay, so we've got just 2 minutes left until we transition over to our live stream, which will be only on Patreon. And that's going to be for those who care to join us and are supporting either patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards or patreon.com/crowdsource the truth, or both. We would welcome people to support both. I just want to give a little bit of a recap to make sure that I understand it, and to also help those listening who might be slightly confused to understand it. So we've got this exercise, Amalgam Virgo, which was ostensibly a training exercise that was taking place June 1st and June 2nd in 2001. So it's no enemy combatants. These are U.S. military training, but because of the technology afforded by the patents you've pointed out, like the AWACS system that allows a training event to, in real time, transition from a training event to a live fire event, and also because of the asymmetric encryption patent that you've just pointed out, you're saying that someone could intervene in a training event like this, maybe with a very small group in the overall group who are aware that something sinister may be about to happen, and utilizing encryption passwords basically can revoke the ability for the users of this military hardware to actually access the hardware. They can take away their password and the person can't log into the computer anymore. They give that password to the bad guys, or disallow the good guys from defending themselves. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a spin-off from Nortel Networks called Entrust, and you'll find on the Imperial Bridge or the Federal Bridge that there are several places where this company called Entrust occurs, and quite often you see the word Entrust with the word root, meaning Entrust can literally pretend to be any part of that bridge. So, for example, it could pretend to be Boeing capture some Boeing aircraft, switch from simulation to live fire, and everyone else outside that schematic or that set of passwords are left, so to speak, sucking air. What the hell happened there?
They just have no idea what's going on. They think it's a glitch, and then before they realize what's going on, the World Trade Center has been destroyed.
And then it switches back to the original, so the friends become friends again, and they look at each other. Well, where did this happen? So you basically have virtual deception, and all war is deception. That goes back, thousands of years. And unfortunately, for the Americans, the British are very good at. Now, let me emphasize, not all Brits or all Americans or all Canadians understand the role of this bridge, but the bridge, I believe, was developed as an imperial bridge to replace the imperial brain. Wow. And that is to say, the British still control the world.
Huh. Well, and with that, David, we're going to transition now. We're going to end this live stream and we'll resume in just 14 minutes on patreon.com. And people can join us there. If you aren't already a sponsor of patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards or patreon.com/crowdsource the truth, please go join now and you can carry on with David and I starting at 6 p.m. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you on Patreon.